Some aircraft are defined by their specifications, speed, altitude, payload, but others are defined by a single, impossible moment. April 1942. The demand from a nation reeling from Pearl Harbor was simple strike back. The solution was anything but. It required a medium bomber, heavy with fuel and bombs, to do something it was never designed for: leap into the sky from the pitching deck of an aircraft carrier. The machine chosen for this moment of defiance was the North American B-25 Mitchell, and the 80 men who flew them, volunteers for a mission with no guarantee of return, became instant legends. But the story of the Mitchell is far greater than one raid. It's a story of versatility, of brute force, and of incredible resilience. It's a story etched not in metal, but in the memories of the men who flew it, fought in it, and fell in love with it. To truly know the B-25, you must first understand the passion it inspires, a passion so strong it can lead a man to do the seemingly impossible all over again. The Man and the Machine. This is Larry Kelly. He's not just an owner, he's a custodian of history. His journey to the B-25 wasn't one of military assignment, but of a lifelong dream culminating in a single, life-changing phone call.
And suddenly, after going through, a month worth of due diligence and everything else as you go through selling 4 businesses, I literally woke up on a Monday morning. This is in September 1997.
Okay.
I literally sat up in bed and suddenly realized I can finally buy the airplane of my dreams, which was a B-25.
Oh, wow. So
I called my buddy, Tom Riley, who, if you've been around warbirds, and you know the name Tom Riley, he's restored 11 B-25s, B-24, 3 B-17s, and a whole bunch of other airplanes.
Yeah.
The XP-82 is his latest, restoration.
Oh, great.
So I called Tom and said, Tom, I want to buy a B-25. What's available? And he said, well, Panchito was available for sale. So, wow, I know that airplane. Rick Corf owns the airplane. So where is it? Well, it's down in Titusville. Who's the broker? Denny Sherman. Okay, give me Denny's phone number. So I literally got up, put my robe on, went to the kitchen table, and I called Denny and asked Denny what was the price. He told me. I thought it was reasonable. I said, wow, that's good. He said, but there's a couple of Frenchmen on the way here. They're in the air right now. They're flying over to buy the airplane. They're going to do an inspection and buy the airplane. Well, I don't like to lose, I guess you could say. Real quickly off the top of my head said, well, call Rick. Ask him, will he take a $10,000 non-refundable cash deposit? Because I asked, did the Frenchman put any money down? No money had changed hands. I said, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ask Rick, will he take a $10,000 cash non-refundable deposit? If I don't buy the airplane by Friday, he can keep the money. And if I buy it, the money goes toward the purchase price. I'll sign a full price contract right now. Oh, so he calls me back about 10 minutes later and says, Rick has agreed to that. I said, what you going to do with the Frenchman? He said, I'll put him up in a hotel. I said, okay. I called Tom in Kissimmee. I said, Tom, how fast can you be in Fort Lauderdale in Denny Sherman's office with a $10,000 cashier's check? He said, about 2 hours. I said, do it. I'll pay you back. I show up down in Titusville, and we're rushing around. We're checking the paperwork. We're going through an inventory of all the spare parts. And, I'm doing the paperwork and everything with Denny Sherman. Tom found a couple of defects in the airplanes that he needs to fix before we fly it.
Okay.
And so he's borrowing Denny's airplane, running back and forth over to Kissimmee, getting some parts and tools. So it's getting dark in the afternoon. We finally finished everything. Final checks have been signed. Bill of sale has been signed. I walk out into the hangar, and I had, first time in my life, anxiety like I had never felt before. I'm standing in front of an airplane, and I say, Tom, how do you get in it? I'd never been in one. I'd never flown one. I had a multi-engine rating. I had a good bit of time. I had a Seneca, So Tom showed me how to lower the bottom hatch and how to get in the airplane. I said, come on, we got to go. He said, we're getting dark. I climbed up in the left seat. He climbed in the right seat, and he showed me how to start it. And, of course, at that time, I'm looking at this thing, good Lord of mercy, there's no way in the world I'll ever be able to figure this out, or all the switches you got to throw in certain sequences and priming. And But we got it started, flew it to Kissimmee. The next day, we flew it to Frederick, Maryland. And like to say, the rest is history, so to speak. I've got about 2,400 hours now in its pilot time in the B-25. Tell how many thousands of hours in maintenance on the airplane.
Larry's B-25 Panchito is a J model, the culmination of a legendary design that was constantly evolving to meet the brutal demands of war. It was the ultimate evolution of the design, incorporating all the hard-won lessons from battlefields around the world. Unlike earlier versions with a glass nose for the navigator's bombardier, many J models were fitted with a solid nose, housing up to 8 heavy 50 caliber machine guns, turning it into a fearsome strafer capable of raking ground targets with devastating firepower. Its story began in March 1939, a pivotal moment as the specter of war loomed over Europe. The United States Army Air Corps, recognizing the urgent need to modernize its bomber fleet, issued specifications for a new generation medium bomber. The criteria were ambitious: a payload of 2,400 pounds, a range of 1,200 miles, and a top speed exceeding 300 miles per hour. Among the competing manufacturers, the design from North American Aviation stood out. Their answer, the NA-62, was the prototype for what would become the B-25. With its distinctive twin-engine, twin-tail design, it not only met, but exceeded the requirements. Its combination of ruggedness, reliability, and versatility won over the military leadership. The rapidly deteriorating global situation, especially following Germany's invasion of Poland in September 1939, prompted an unprecedented decision. Bypassing the typically lengthy prototype phase, the Army ordered the B-25 almost directly into mass production. The urgency of a world on the brink of war meant there was no time to waste. This bold move rushed the B-25 into service, where it would go on to become one of the most iconic Allied weapons of World War II.
It's interesting, the first 9 airplanes had a straight dihedral, meaning the wings went upward at a very slight angle from the wing root all the way out to the wingtip.
Okay.
But the airplanes had a bad Dutch roll. The 4th B-25 ever built is still flying, and it was originally built with a straight wing. These airplanes went to the 17th Bomb Group that were flying coastal patrol off Pendleton, Oregon, but it had a bad Dutch roll. So the engineers with a hunch and a slide rule decided, well, maybe if we take some of the dihedral out, it'll help. That's one thing I always ask our students to do, is kick the airplane into a Dutch roll like a test pilot, then determine how much oscillations will be to dampen it.
Okay.
So it literally went to the wing attach angle, which is just outboard of the nacelle.
Mm-hmm.
So the dihedral from the wing root out to just the outboard side of the nacelle remained the same. They literally just modified the wing to a neutral dihedral from there straight out. And that's what makes it have a gull wing appearance.
This remarkable adaptability became Mitchell's defining trait. Originally conceived as a medium-altitude bomber, its early versions, like the B-25CD, were tasked with dropping ordnance from a relatively safe height. Their elegant glass noses were not just for aesthetics. They were the critical workspace for the bombardier, who would use the complex Norden bomb sight to aim at strategic enemy targets. However, the brutal realities of the war, particularly in the Pacific Theater, demanded a different kind of approach. Anti-shipping missions and strafing runs against fortified Japanese positions required low-level attacks with pinpoint accuracy and dense firepower. In response, the Mitchell underwent a dramatic transformation. The elegant glass nose gave way to pure, concentrated firepower. This shift created fearsome strafer variants. The B-25G and H models were the most extreme examples, mounting a massive 75mm cannon in the nose, essentially a field artillery piece bolted into an aircraft capable of puncturing ship hulls or destroying concrete bunkers with a single shell. This enormous cannon was supplemented by 50 caliber machine guns to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Later J models often featured a solid nose packed with up to 8 machine guns, creating an impenetrable wall of lead. It was no longer just a bomber. It had evolved into one of the most feared ground attack and anti-shipping aircraft of the war, a testament to its robust and incredibly versatile design.
The B-25 was a heavily armed bomber of World War II. You could have 8 50 caliber guns in the nose, 2 on each side in a package gun, so that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The top turret, by the time the J models were built, was moved forward of the bomb bay because you added waist guns by them. And so that countered the weight of the waist guns and the added tail gun, which had 2 50 caliber guns. So the turret was moved forward.
Okay.
So we were 8 plus 4, plus 2 more in the 50 caliber turret that could be turned forward. So that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 50 caliber machine guns for strafing.
Good Lord.
Plus, as they say, 14 coming and 4 going, because you had 2 waist guns, 1 on each side.
Yep. Okay.
Operated by 1 operator, because there's not room for 2 waist gunners in a B-25. There's only room for 1. Anywhere you stand in a B-25, you can put your hands out and touch both sides of the airplane. Not very big.
Skinny, yeah.
And the tail gunner had 2 50 caliber guns in the tail. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 50 caliber machine guns, plus a 2,000-pound bomb load, plus 8 5-inch HVAR rockets, 4 rockets under each wing.
Oh my gosh.
Bombs, depth charges, machine guns. It was a heavily, heavily armed airplane.
The cauldron of combat. For all its firepower, however, the B-25 was only as good as the crews who flew it into harm's way. And few places were more hostile than the forgotten front of the war, the China-Burma-India theater. It was a secondary front often starved of resources and attention compared to the war in Europe. But the dangers were just as profound. Here, the enemy wasn't just Japanese flak and nimble Zero fighters. The enemy was the environment itself. It was the terrain, a treacherous landscape of razor-sharp Himalayan peaks and uncharted valleys, where an emergency landing meant almost certain death. It was the weather, with violent, unpredictable monsoons that could tear an aircraft apart, or dense fog that could swallow a formation whole. And perhaps most daunting of all, it was the sheer isolation, a profound sense of being cut off from the rest of the world, where survival was a gamble if you went down. It was into this crucible that young men, many of them barely out of their teens, were entrusted with complex war machines. They had to confront not only the enemy, but also their fear and the unforgiving forces of nature daily. Lieutenant Dave Hayward was a 19-year-old pilot thrust into this reality.
The purpose of our being sent there was, it was a long line of gotcha situations. America was determined to keep China in the war for several reasons. One, that there were somewhere between 1 million and 2 million Japanese troops tied up in China that were occupying China. In doing so, the Chinese were subject to these Japanese having closed all of the ports of China, so that China could not get any supplies except its one avenue, and that was the old Burma Road area across from northeast India into southwest China. So the Japanese were intent on closing that last supply route, and so they invaded Burma in 1942, and they moved in some fighter planes into the very northern part of Burma. And these fighter planes were attempting to shoot down our cargo planes that were flying the hump, as we called it. That's a branch of the Himalaya Mountains that extends north and south between India on the west, China on the east. So the Japanese were in there with their fighter planes to try and shoot down our cargo planes. So we were brought in there to intercept the Japanese supply lines that were supplying these fighter planes, so that the fighter planes would not get fuel and not get ammunition and not get any material they needed to carry on what they were doing. So it was just, as I say, a game of gotcha, that each party was trying to come up with something that would trump the other party.
On the ground, the war was a battle of attrition against the environment itself. The living conditions were as challenging as the missions. It was a world of bamboo and mud huts known as bashas, whose thatched roofs often leaked under torrential monsoons. The air was thick with a constant, oppressive humidity, a suffocating blanket that never lifted, leaving everything from clothing to equipment perpetually damp and prone to rot. Armies of malaria-carrying mosquitoes droned incessantly, and the threat of dysentery snakes and other tropical diseases was a constant fear. It was a primal existence, where the monotony and homesickness were broken only by unrelenting discomfort. And yet, for all the misery on the ground, nothing could compare to the acute terror of the missions themselves. The greatest challenge above all else was surviving the flight to the target and back. Each mission was a symphony of tension, beginning with takeoffs from crude, bumpy airstrips. This was followed by long hours over impenetrable jungle or hostile mountain ranges, where every strange noise from the engines sent hearts racing. Finally came the brief, violent crescendo over the target, a sky turned into a hellscape of anti-aircraft flak and enemy fighters diving out of the sun. Surviving that moment was merely the beginning of the anxious journey home, often in a damaged aircraft, with wounded crewmates and dwindling fuel.
That was the scariest thing that happened to me. You talk about your challenges. And my very first mission, this happened to me. I was flying again, co-pilot. We had 9 airplanes. We went after an airfield in central Burma where the Japanese had fighter planes. We dropped our bombs on their airfield, turned around and headed home. And just as we turned, I looked out my window and I could see airplanes down there. They're obviously not ours. I counted as many as 21, but there probably were many more than that. They were both fighters and bombers, and they were heading westerly as we were, gradually getting higher and higher until finally they came up to our level. And our airplane had recently been repaired from a belly landing, meaning a landing that was made with the wheels not down but up. And it had been repaired, and consequently it was just a little slower than all the rest of the planes in our squadron. So we were flying at the tail end Charlie, and here we were soon to be a straggler, left all by ourselves out there. The rest of the squadron had gone on ahead, probably not realizing we were back there, because I tried calling on the radio and it was just so much jabber you can't believe. So we were left all alone, a straggler, and all these Japanese airplanes. Finally our gunner called up and he said, "Sir, there's a Zero out here doing a slow roll, and I can't get a shot at him. He's in our blind spot." So pretty soon I looked out my window and I saw that it's a Japanese Oscar, and I found out since the war that it's true that at that field in central Burma, there was a squadron of Japanese Oscars, and they looked just exactly like that. So that was with the same markings that are on that plane. So that's the view I had as I looked out the window, and I could see the silhouette of the pilot there. And it made me kind of think about 2 or 3 things. Again, I was just a young kid trying to grow up, and I thought, well, gee, here's a fellow out there. He's probably come from a good family. He's probably had the same training I've had to fly an airplane. He's possibly had a year or 2 of college like I have. And he's out there doing the best he can for his own country, and I'm doing the best I can for my own country. And I had the strangest feeling about looking out and seeing that plane out there. And I also had another thought that I thought, you know, sometimes in life there are things worrying about, and sometimes there are things in life that are really not worrying about. And if I had to grade this one, I would say this is definitely one of those things worth worrying about. Is this guy going to shoot us down or not? Apparently our gunners couldn't get a shot at him. I guess maybe he was just barely out of any accurate range and they couldn't do it. But anyway, there he was. Well, the story is told in my book back there, but obviously I'm standing in front of you today, so he did not shoot us down.
For reasons unknown, perhaps, to protect his own bombers, or perhaps because the element of surprise was lost, the Oscar pilot broke off his attack. Dave Hayward and his crew survived their first mission with a story that would last a lifetime. But many were not so lucky. In their first 3 months in China, his squadron lost 12 of their 16 airplanes. Faced with such overwhelming odds, the psychological toll was immense. In the face of constant danger and bleak conditions, the crews found ways to cope. Humor, often absurd and chaotic, became a vital survival tool.
Oh, that was something. This was our theater at Chakulia, India. And one of our guys was, I couldn't call him a troublemaker, but he was a fun lover. And our movies were pretty dull. They were old, and half the time the sound didn't work, and it's something you'd seen before. So he got a hold of a water buffalo, and he got on it, and he rode the thing right through the theater while everybody was watching the movie. And of course, people will remember that incident a lot more than they will what was being shown that night at the theater. On arrival, they give you this wonderful fresh bread, and you see these little dark specks in there. Oh my gosh, they've got caraway seeds or something in there. Of course, what happens is they bake the bread at night, and while they're kneading the bread, the bugs are flying around in the lantern light, and they get in the dough, and next morning you have bugs in the bread. Oh, first anniversary, someone thought, well, we ought to have a cake. And so we didn't have any ingredients for making any kind of a birthday cake. So in the mess sergeant, he just took 2 old loaves of bread and got out some shaving cream and made it look like cake so people could take a picture of it. And some unsuspecting guy didn't know the difference, and he took a big bite of it, and there he was. Oh, this one, we had a Basha we called the Waldorf because it was available to people who were just visiting, or new arrivals, or people who were just passing through for the night. And this one lieutenant came in and set down his paraphernalia near his bunk and went off to the officers' club to have a couple of drinks before going to bed. And while he was gone, some fun-loving people, they went out and got a water buffalo, a cow like this, and tied it to the man's bunk. And then they went out and got some chickens that the mess sergeant was planning for dinner the next night and put them inside the man's mosquito netting right on his bed. So, of course, you know what cows do to floors, and you know what chickens do to beds. And when the man came reeling back from the officers' club ready to go get a good night's sleep, well, you can imagine what he stepped in. And he was so darn mad, he pulled out his .45 and he just went out, I'm going to get the doggone guys that did this if it's the last thing I do, and firing his gun into the air. And they never saw him again, of course. He was gone the next day.
While Dave Hayward fought in the jungles of Burma, other B-25 crews were fighting a very different war in the skies over Europe. Here, the enemy was not the unforgiving natural world, but a highly organized, industrialized war machine. Their target, the Brener Pass, the main artery connecting Germany to its Axis forces in Italy. In a campaign aptly named Operation Strangle, the Allies were determined to sever this critical rail and road link, choking off the flow of troops, tanks, and ammunition to the Italian front. This was no simple bombing run. The Brener Pass was a geographical trap. The towering Alps funneled the bombers into a narrow, predictable corridor, transforming it into a 75-mile-long shooting gallery. The Germans exploited this to the fullest, lining the mountainsides with hundreds of anti-aircraft guns. Notorious 88mm cannons capable of hitting high-altitude bombers were positioned where they could fire down upon the formations, creating a lethal crossfire from all angles. Every bridge, every tunnel, and every curve of the railway was fiercely defended. For such a mission, the B-25's Mitchell was both the ideal tool and a vulnerable target. Unlike the high-flying B-17 heavy bombers, the B-25 was a medium bomber more effective at lower altitudes for precision strikes against small targets like railway tracks and bridges. Its heavy defensive armament with machine guns in multiple positions could help fend off enemy fighters. However, flying lower placed it directly in the most effective kill zone of the flak batteries. It was here that the B-25's legendary toughness was tested to its limits. Its robust twin-engine design meant it could absorb incredible punishment and still have a chance of limping home on a single engine. The crews became experts in lightning-fast attacks, diving into the valleys, dropping their bombs, and getting out before the flak could zero in. Every mission into the Brener Pass was a high-stakes gamble, a testament to both the resilience of the machine and the extraordinary courage of the men who flew it.
Probably out of my up to 68 missions, 45 of them were all in the Brener Pass, because it was really becoming very desperate to stop them, because we didn't know this, but the big plans was going to be D-Day, and they didn't want any Germans to get back up to that area to support that defense. The Brener Pass was a difficult target to find because you're flying over the Alps. Sometimes you have to reach 15,000, 16,000 feet. We had no oxygen, we had no heating equipment, and you had to fly that long for a while to get to your target area. And the navigators had a hell of a job trying to find out where to approach the Brener Pass to go in so you find the target real quick and do a 180 and come out. You never flew all the way across the pass, because ultimately there were 560 gun sights in there, guns, 88 millimeter guns, and 105 millimeter guns, and 40 millimeter guns. All could reach your altitude very easily. We never surprised them. They knew we were coming, and we're like shooting like ducks in a barrel. The ability for the Germans to be accurate was astounding, because they had radar, they had proximity fuses, and they would put up a box with flak, so you had to fly through it, so they'd get you all the time.
But like its crews, the B-25 could absorb incredible punishment and keep flying. One C model, nicknamed Patches, completed 300 missions. By the end of the war, it had over 400 patched holes and was so distorted from battle damage that it required constant extreme trim adjustments just to fly straight. It was a testament to the ruggedness of both the machine and the men who refused to give up, the custodians of the legacy. For all its success in combat, the B-25, Mitchell had a split personality. Once airborne, it was a surprisingly docile, easy-to-fly, and dependable machine. Pilots loved it for its stable flight characteristics, thanks in part to its distinctive twin-tail design, which provided excellent directional stability. It had no nasty in-flight vices. It was an honest aircraft that responded predictably to control inputs without being overly sensitive or sluggish. Its two powerful Wright R2600 twin Cyclone radial engines not only provided ample thrust to carry a heavy bomb load, but also offered a critical sense of security. If one engine was knocked out by enemy fire, the other was often powerful enough to limp the crew back home. In the air, the B-25 was a trusted companion. But on the ground, that docile companion transformed into a beast. Once its wheels touched down, it was notoriously difficult to tame. The primary issue lay with its tricycle landing gear, specifically the nose gear. While this configuration offered better visibility during taxiing than tail-dragger aircraft, the B-25's nose gear was relatively fragile and infamous for its tendency to collapse on a hard landing, an event which could prove catastrophic. Furthermore, managing the multi-ton machine on the runway required both skill and muscle. Its hydraulic brakes, while powerful, could be grabby and uneven, creating a risk of a ground loop if the pilot wasn't careful. The deafening roar and violent vibration from two massive engines at such close quarters made taxiing a physical and mental challenge. It demanded absolute respect from its pilot. It was a paradox of engineering a graceful dancer in the sky that became a cantankerous brute on the tarmac. Torx.
But on the ground, that's what separates the men from the boys. It's a free-castering nose wheel.
Okay.
And you can't use the brakes because the brakes are metal to metal. Bronze rotors, steel stators, 14 pair in each wheel.
Yep.
And if you try to taxi using brakes, one B-25 operator, going to go unnamed, last year actually had a brake catch on fire, and they almost lost the airplane because the pilot was taxiing it using the brakes, dragging the brakes.
Wow.
You have to learn to taxi the airplane. It's a free-castering nose wheel, but the rudders are in the slipstream.
Okay.
So easy to fly, but one heck of a thing to keep on the runway and to taxi it, because you learn to taxi the airplane by using the rudder, the prop wash, differential thrust, very gentle differential thrust, and even to make your turns, to stop your turns, you're using it with thrust and rudders and using the brakes only when absolutely necessary.
And then there's the noise. It wasn't merely a loud sound. It was a raw, visceral assault on the senses that pilots had to endure for hours on end. The source of this deafening symphony was the heart of the beast, two massive Wright R2600 twin Cyclone 14-cylinder radial engines mounted just outside the cockpit. Unlike modern engines, there were no mufflers. Each of the 28 cylinders, 14 per engine, vented its combustion directly into the air, through short exhaust stacks, creating a continuous, thunderous series of explosions. Adding to the deep, guttural roar of the engines was the sharp tearing sound of the propellers. As the tips of the large blades spun at high speed, they could approach the speed of sound, creating a distinctive ripping noise, almost like a giant sheet of canvas being torn. All of this was amplified by the vibration of the entire aluminum airframe, a thin metal can separating the crew from the sonic tempest outside. The howl of the wind rushing over the gun turrets and glass nose only added to the chaos. This was not a noise you simply heard with your ears. It was a physical force. It was a vibration that resonated through the metal floor, up through the seats, and shook your very bones. Normal conversation was impossible. Every order, every warning, every word had to be shouted into the intercom system built into their leather flight helmets. The fatigue induced by this relentless noise was profound, leaving crews physically and mentally exhausted after a long mission. When the engines finally cut out after landing, the sudden silence was almost painful, leaving a persistent ringing in the ears. A physical reminder of the price of flying such a powerful war machine.
It is the noisiest cockpit of World War II.
Okay.
Bar none. You'll find that in many reference books. I have lost substantial hearing in my left ear because of it before David Clark came out with their A20 headsets, which has saved what left I had of hearing. But noise canceling, anything to make it a little quieter.
Yeah.
That's its shortcoming. It's loud. I tell you what, I tell people how to describe it. Imagine you go outdoors and you get your metal garbage can.
Okay.
And you get your two neighbors and two jackhammers, and you put that metal garbage can over your head, and you put a jackhammer on each side of that, and they start running the jackhammers. That's how the sensation. You don't just hear it; you feel the thumping. 3,400 horsepower, just a couple of feet from you, with short exhaust stacks that are just pounding the side of the airplane like a timpani drum.
Today, the mission has changed. The fight is no longer against a foreign enemy with guns and fighters. The adversary now is intangible, but no less relentless. It is time itself, the corrosion of metal, the decay of wiring, and the fading of memory. Every rusted bolt, every cracked rubber gasket is a small skirmish in a larger war against entropy. Sourcing replacement parts for an 80-year-old machine is an archaeological treasure hunt requiring a global network and sheer luck. It is a battle against the natural order of decay. For Larry Kelly and his team of dedicated volunteers, this is not a hobby. It is a sacred duty. They are the custodians of a legacy. Every hour they spend turning wrenches, their hands stained with grease and oil, is an act of reverence. Every dollar spent on fuel, each gallon of precious expensive avgas, is not just for a flight, but for reigniting the flame of history. They do this not for glory, but because they understand that this aircraft is more than a machine. It is a flying memorial, a living classroom, and a tangible link to a generation whose stories are in danger of falling silent forever.
It really bothers me that so many kids nowadays have no idea of the history of the conflict, the greatest conflict that mankind has ever known, which was World War II.
Yep.
They don't even understand who the warring parties were or why.
Yep.
They don't understand the atrocities that were committed. They don't understand anything at all about the history of such a traumatic time And we try to keep that alive. We actually are dedicated to that.
The B-25 Mitchell. In the grand chronicle of aviation, few aircraft can claim such a multifaceted identity. It was the dependable workhorse produced in the thousands and deployed to every corner of the globe. It was the brutish ship killer of the Pacific, a low-level terror armed with cannons and a wall of machine gun fire. It was a veritable fortress on wings, a testament to its survivor's spirit, famous for absorbing horrific punishment and still bringing its crew home on a single, sputtering engine. But the true measure of the Mitchell cannot be found in specifications or combat records alone. For all its steel wiring and raw power, its most profound legacy lies in its role as a vessel for the courage of a generation. It was the vibrating, deafening world where young men from farms and cities faced their fears, forged unbreakable bonds, and flew into the heart of history. The aircraft was the instrument, but their bravery was the force that guided it through flak-filled skies and treacherous mountain passes. Today, the echoes of that era are fading. But thanks to the dedicated custodians of its legacy, the restorers, the mechanics, the pilots, and the museums, the Mitchell endures not as a static relic, but as a living, breathing piece of history. And as long as they continue their work, its story, and the unforgettable roar of its engines, will continue to thunder across our skies, ensuring its legend and its roar will echo for generations to come.